everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we're going to be talking about this book, The Bravest You, 5 Steps to Fight Your Biggest Fears, Find Your Passion, and Unlock Your Extraordinary Life. And we have Adam Kirk Smith here. And we're going to be focusing on the fear, your biggest fears part, because what I've noticed as a career and life coach is that seems to be the biggest impediment for people to move forward. So welcome, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me, CJ. It's fun to be here. I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to it.
I'm looking forward to kind of sharing our stories with helping people because both of us work with people who are trying to make big shifts in their life. And I thought we would focus
Yeah,
on career shifts or, starting new businesses and those types of things since that's kind of your forte. So,
sure.
so tell me a little bit about first, what led you to write the book and what was the purpose in writing the book and intention?
Sure. So, as we were talking about in the pre-interview, I think a little background might be helpful for listeners today. So, started out, owned a business, um, but I started online blogging because of my love for writing. So, 10 years ago, I started a blog just because I like to write. And so, at that time, the first month, I had 10 monthly readers, and 5 of those being family members, 5 other ones being friends and anonymous people. And so they were just, it was a life happening every day blog that I was keeping. And then kind of within the first 6 years grew exponentially. Within the 6th year, 40,000 monthly readers,
Mm,
was able to start a business there. I wasn't wanting to become a life coach or consultant per se, but I saw what people needed, my talents, my passions, combined it all together and came up with this idea because the emails I was receiving from these readers had to do with coaching, consulting, because what I was writing about was running a business.
right,
And so they needed help in their own life. And at that time, I was doing it for free, but had a family, didn't want to spend all this time, with
right.
all these people without charging for my time. So eventually had to put a price tag on my time, and that's how it was born. And so I think a lot of people might have a misconception about that, about life coaches or consultants. I think a lot of people probably that happened to them. They built it first, an audience, and then saw what business that they could create around it. You and me were just trying to help people. That was, our talent and our passions, and we were able to form a business around that. But the book, yeah, like you said, that is the number one obstacle that people face in their endeavors. Um, from the people that I've talked to over the past, I started in 2014. So, we're 4 years later, hundreds of people over the past 4 years that I've been able to talk to. And the number one obstacle was a fear, whether it be of money or of an exit plan or of not having the right employees. And those are very micro fears. But, in the book, I make it more macro, and those could fit under, the fear of change or whatever fear we might be talking about. But that's why I wrote the book, because people deal with fear, myself included. I include a lot of my own stories in the book, growing up, being fearful of pleasing mom and dad, fearful of going to the right school, picking the right, degree, choosing the right career path, owning businesses, whatever it might be, and I hope I communicate this in the book. I'm not one
Yeah.
who subscribes to living a completely fearless life. As new things come in life, new fears come, and the bravery process, which the book is built on, um, is something that people will need to revisit again and again in life, and it's there to help people through their fears.
Yeah. So one of the things
Yep.
that when we were doing the pre-interview is that, and then I said that I enjoyed most about this book is that I think probably we coached slightly different clients. I work with a lot of people who are in corporate jobs that are interested in moving to either another corporate job or starting a new business, which is probably a lot of the same clients that you coach, which
Yeah.
people are trying to start a new thing. And so what I thought when I talk to clients, one of the things that they appreciate the most is an affirmation of like, Oh, that's, it's like you go to a doctor and you're like, what's this little thing on there? And there it's a blankety
Yeah.
blanky inosis thing, whatever. And you're like, okay, now I have
Right.
a diagnosis on what it is that I have. Now I know where to go and move from that point onward. So it seems from in this equivalent situation, we have all these fears, and actually naming those fears, it's almost like emotional intelligence in the sense that fear intelligence, knowing the type of fear that we have, moves us to the next step of a solution. But if we don't know what the fear is, it's hard to even know where to start. We just are like circling around in the unknown, and not even knowing what kind of fear we have. So you talk about different types of fears. Hopefully we'll be able to, but it's the fear of change, fear of missing out, fear of inadequacy, fear of uncertainty, fear of being judged, fear of failure. So someone was asking earlier, like, well, what is it? Everyone has fears. Yes, they do. But I think it's actually gaining awareness and specificity on the type of fear that we have. And
Yeah.
and
That's good.
that helps. It helps a lot. So let's talk about the first one, which is the fear of change. And
Yeah.
oftentimes I hear, how do I know it's time to make a change? How do I know if it's time to move to the next step? And you have like 8 signs, and one is damaging health and relationships. Uh, uh, you're experiencing constant frustration. You keep arriving at another dead end. You would rather be doing something you hate. You don't feel
Yeah.
appreciated. Life
Yeah.
feels boring or unsatisfying. There's little value found in what you're doing, either for yourself or others. So if you went through this checklist and you go, yep, like all
Yeah.
8,
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
time,
Yeah, yeah,
high
it
time
may
to
be
go.
time. I made sure to put maybe time to quit because there might be some times we visit those in relationships, and sometimes the best answer isn't to quit
Right.
relationships. The way I wrote it was kind of a all encompassing life guide, but yeah, I mean that one where we don't feel appreciated is something that I run into often. And people either, they're not in an environment that they feel they can thrive. And
Mm.
so whether we're talking about an environment at a corporation or business, or at an environment of a business they created themselves, I think going back to what you said, self-awareness is huge. And it's okay if you want to start a business, it's okay to be part of a team and help a corporation, but understanding who you are and being in an environment that you feel appreciated, and not only appreciated, that you can thrive in, and your talents are appreciated, and you're given room and space to make mistakes, and do your job. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
And so this, not having satisfaction in a job and in their career, I think a lot of it has to do with just not feeling appreciated. And that can be communication with your team, with your boss, with your coworkers. It could be a lot of things. But yeah, I mean, that conversation of quitting is usually centered around some sort of aspect
Yeah.
with that one. But yeah, there's 7 other signs there that
Yeah, I thought I'd actually point out a couple, because in the one that you just mentioned, I was just talking to a client who had to have a really hard conversation with an employee who was not doing what they loved doing, and it was obvious what this person really wanted to do was be a professor. So they're
uh,
taking their job in sales and making a professorial. So they're trying to have that job fit what their strongest strength was, versus recognizing, like, you know what? I'm really great at being a teacher, and that's what I should be doing, versus trying to force being a teacher into a job,
yeah,
which is part of sales, but not all of sales. Some of the other things that I thought were in your list that I really like are um, damaging health and relationships, because oftentimes that's huge, right? Like, you start
yeah.
drinking, you start eating too much, you're binging too many Netflix shows. Like, sometimes that like need to relax, I think, is often a call for, like, I'm not getting my basic needs met, so I need to like gorge myself with food, TV, or alcohol to numb everything out.
Right.
Sadly.
And the story I share in the book is ending up in an emergency room with a panic attack,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought it was a heart attack. And it was because my schedule was so full of things that weren't getting me to my goals. And so that was a huge point in life for me that I said, hey, wait, I need to take a look at my schedule, remove those things that aren't moving me towards bravery. And I know this sounds just so foundational, but the problem is you might look a year later and say, how did I get all these things, all these commitments in my calendar? And it's just little by little they add up. And so by that time I was doing something every day that wasn't leading me to a goal. I had the best intentions of helping someone, but in the end, it ended up hurting my health and a panic attack. My blood pressure skyrocketed. They wanted to give me blood pressure medication. I tried to take it. It made me feel terrible. I had to get off of it. We went through some different things and was eventually able to come off of it. But, that's not healthy living either. And so, you don't realize it until you're there. My hope is that people will realize it before they get there.
Maybe instead of you get that's actually the worst when you get to that lecture. But like if at that point, but if you're experiencing constant frustration, that's maybe a point before you get to that point, right? Because probably before you got there, you're getting grumpy or like maybe snapping at your kids. I mean. Let me put it this way. I know that when I was at that point, I was snapping at my kids, snapping at my husband. The other things that you have on this list, you're arriving at another dead end. So I've heard this where people aren't getting promoted. They're like, I just can't get promoted because either the company isn't deep enough, so there aren't many steps in between where I am and the top level, or I'm just not getting promoted for whatever reason. So I've heard that. I've heard the don't feel like appreciating. Not feeling appreciated. Life feels boring or unsatisfactory, and you would rather be doing something than doing something you hate. Tell me a little about those things because I know that I just haven't heard examples like that or couldn't resonate. So can you share what that means?
Like the one you'd rather be doing something you hate?
Yeah.
That one? Yeah. So if I'm at work, it all comes back. So the main thing with the bravery process that I saw from my research is people who were able to get from fear to bravery is this passion piece. And passion has become such a buzzword. But when you really look at the heart of passion and its meaning, core means heart. Passio means to endure. And so the passion really is that thing that will just help you endure those things. And so when I talk about you'd rather be doing something you hate, then passion's usually not there. And so if I'm doing, if there's something that you hate at home, you'd rather be doing a chore that you absolutely hate than the work that you're doing, then, that's probably a good sign that it might be time to quit. But
if I'm doing a lot of laundry and dishes, maybe something's wrong, CJ.
Yeah,
I get it.
That was a little humorous. I gave the example of laundry. If I'm thinking that I want to do laundry rather than this, maybe it's time to look elsewhere. But
if you see me doing lots of taxes, it's time to change. Okay. So what would you offer in terms of, so people are starting over, and one of the fear of changes that I have is the fear that I hear a lot is, I'm fear of starting over because I'll have new responsibilities and I'm not sure what my clients will look like. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen on the market. I don't like my boss. How about if I have a worse boss? Like there's just kind of fear of starting all over, which is one of the aspects of fear of change. What do you usually advise folks that come to you with that fear?
Fear a lot of time happens in the past. I give a study from the University of Cincinnati. It's something like 85% of the things that we fear happened in the past. And so that fear of change that we hold on to is we analyze the previous 15 without giving the importance of the next 15. We hold the previous years as more important as the present and the future. And so I would just say the fear of change, the people that are experiencing that fear, it would be realize that, hey, new opportunities are going to come, but realize that the next 15 are going to be more important than your previous 15. You can't change the past. You can learn from it. It's an important practice to go back and learn from it, but not to hold it so dearly that you base everything on the known. There's going to be some things that you step into that are going to be unknown. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times fear also has things to do with the things we're not familiar with.
Right.
And so we have to become more familiar with them. We have to practice more. We have to become more comfortable. And that's when fear starts to diminish. But
Right.
yeah, that fear of change, I would just say, realize how important the present and the future are. And, that's a whole different conversation too, of learning how to be present, something that's very difficult now with
Yeah,
social media and
absolutely.
everything going on. But, and that goes into the fear of missing out, which is another fear that I bring up in the
Yeah.
book. But,
So before we
but
go
yeah,
into fear of missing out, so it seems like just
yeah,
to actually reiterate that, and I think that I've seen that as well. Like sometimes the fears are fears from our past. So we've actually experienced, an awful boss, and we've been traumatized by that boss that yells at us every day in our office, and
yeah,
we're afraid, well, maybe that other boss is going to be just as bad, or a
right,
boyfriend that is abusive that we stay with longer than we should because, well, maybe all my next boyfriend's going to be the same. And I don't know. I guess what I would say to that is that, yeah, they may be and they may not be. But if you already know the one unhappy situation, you already know you're unhappy with your existing boss. So at this point, you have a
yeah,
50-50 chance.
right.
You better be like, you're 100% going to be unhappy with your existing boss. Or you can
That's
switch, and
true.
at least there's like a 50-50 chance that, that you're
Yeah,
going to like them or not like them. But to actually stay in a situation that you're unhappy with is a
that's a
choice
good
that,
point.
yeah, it's a choice that you're making. So be consciously aware that you're making that choice and choosing to do nothing, and say, okay, I'm choosing to do nothing even though I'm not
Mm,
happy. Okay, so
yeah.
how about let's actually go into fear of missing out. So what is that idea? I love the idea of the fear of missing out, and I hadn't identified it, but I think again the importance is being awareness that you do have a fear of missing out. How do you define what the fear of missing out is?
It's, in my opinion, just from my own story, because I dealt with it again, going back to my own story, starting a blog 10 years ago. Within 4 years, I was starting to see some success. So it was just hard for me to stay off online. I was
Right.
always gravitating towards,
Ah,
smartphones had just come out. And so, yeah, always doing that instead of being present with my family, with people that I love, with people that I cared about, and my time and my priorities were showing that I cared more about people that I hadn't even met.
oh,
And there
so
were
true.
some ego things tied to that,
Right.
if I'm honest. And I could say all day long I was helping people, I was trying to help people, but I think what honesty is a huge part of all of this. We have to be honest with ourselves. Are these fears valid? Are they not? Do we have ego playing into things? Do we not? But yeah, it's wishing that you could be anywhere else than where you currently are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think social media, I touched on this already. Social media is playing a huge part of that. I
Mm.
think, as with anything, social media can be great. It's built my business into what it is. It's helped you. It's helped listeners, but in moderation, as with anything in life.
Right.
If you're on it 24/7, you're missing out on the beautiful moments that you have. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. I don't want to miss out on beautiful moments with my kids. I have a wife. It's there's just things you don't want to miss out on. And if you're not careful, as all of us have, you begin going through your Facebook feed, looking at pictures. It's 2 hours later, and what did you really accomplish? And so that's where we have to be really honest with ourselves and our priorities. And with your show, with my work, it's a lot of work behind the scenes. It's not out front. It's getting guests, emailing guests, coming up with questions, doing this, editing. There's a whole thing to it. And if you're always on your phone, it's not only you're keeping you from relationships, but as Cal Newport wrote Deep Work, the book, he would call it deep work. It's keeping us from the deep work that is necessary to stand out in a crowded market, to
Mm.
put our best work forward, to grow our businesses. The only way is to differentiate ourselves from the competition. The only way to do that is to put in deep work, to put in our best work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the fear of missing out, if we're not careful, can also keep us from.
Yeah, I love the idea of what you've mentioned several times in your book, The Bravest You, is you talk about being, I keep on, see, plug your book again.
It's a bright cover. You can't miss it.
Exactly, it's perfect. So the thing that you mentioned several times is being a people pleaser, which I love actually just stating that, as because I think that if everyone at some level is a people pleaser and they want to be liked. And so social media, I think, is one of those things that is so seductive because you can actually be liked and people responding to you in a positive manner. And you can get addicted to those numbers and have that be a sense of who you are. And I think and the troubling thing is that almost in all successful businesses now, you have to be able to do that. And so, yeah, so I think that fear of missing out.
And the other interesting thing around social media, not really on the topic, but this is like the first generation of growing up, like my 7-year-old and media and phone. And it's going to be interesting to see how this generation, let's say 10, 15 years from now, looking back, where this whole social media conversation is going to fit in. You don't know if it's healthy, unhealthy. You just don't know yet, but it's going to be interesting to talk about in a few years.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a balanced thing, but I think that fear of missing out was a thing even before social media, and I think it's even more dire now than it was because of social media and the immediacy of being liked and popular in a short matter of posting, and then within like 5 minutes getting like 100 pluses or 30 shares. You're like, oh, everyone loves me, right? So I think that's hard. I think there are other things I was thinking about, like, people who I'm sure that both of us have worked with who have said, I am a rock star in my current job. I'm getting the pats on the back and I'm going to be promoted as a partner in the law firm, or those kinds of things. And you actually have this wonderful set of questions that you ask people to know when it's time, like if you have this fear of missing out idea. But what would you say to someone who's thriving in their current job and still wants to leave because they've done the deep work, like you mentioned that Cal Newport talks about. They've done the deep work, but they still feel like there's no meaning, so they have to leave. What do you say to folks that you've consulted with?
That question you're asking that I've heard multiple times reminds me of someone like Jerry Seinfeld. We look at him, who left Seinfeld on top, and people always asked him after that segment of his career, why did you leave on top? And he said, one, he just knew, and two, it was all about timing. That he felt he added all that he felt he could add. It was time to leave and to go on now. And he came to Springfield, which is 30 minutes away from where I live here in Illinois, and did a stand-up routine probably a month ago, and we saw him. But he's out doing stand-up again, and actually on his show, Coffee and Cars with Comedians, he talked with President Obama, and Obama asked him back, why are you still doing stand-up? You could be doing anything. You could be vacationing. He said, I learned to fall in love with the work. And so I think it's all about the laugh for him. So he's back out, we don't realize all the work that goes into a comedian routine. He's out bombing some, but he's picking up the laughs. And for an hour routine, he's taking all of these 30 shows that he did at these small clubs in New York and turning it into an hour bit that he spent a year testing out material, and it ended up being 1 hour. And so all of that to say, learning to fall in love with the work. But yes, the 5 questions all people pleasers should ask. Will saying yes make me wish I had said no later? Is it inconvenient? And if it is, how come? How could I be doing right now that is more important than this one thing? How many chances will I have to do this one thing? And is it detrimental to my health? And if people are questioning leaving, at whatever stage they're in, if they're on the top and any of those things, it could be, time. But yeah, I would just say going back, it would be to fall in love with the work. And if they feel like truly they have put everything in to what they're currently doing, then that's just an answer that individual will have within them. They'll know, and I talk about intuition a lot in the book. I talk about going with the gut. And so it all comes back to taking into what we've been through before, intuition, the gut, and then leading through towards bravery. And
Yeah, it's
so,
like
yeah,
when
I'll
I
just,
listen when I actually integrate everything that you just said. I mean, the interesting thing is that it's almost like the dialogue between heart and soul and mind. So when they asked Jerry Seinfeld, "Why did you leave when you were on the top?" It makes no logical sense because you could have squeezed
mhm.
more money out of the scenario. You could have, right? So,
He was
but
offered,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
he was
So
offered a crazy amount of money
right.
to come
So
back.
will saying yes make me wish I said no later, right? So at that juncture, your heart is going like, God, your heart is like, I need to go. But your head is like, will I regret this later because I will have made a mistake?
Mhm.
That to me seems to be the question. Or is it inconvenient? And if so, how come? Like, it's not convenient right now because I have like a 3 and 7 year old to actually leave my job at a restaurant. But I have like
Yeah,
I cannot not do it. I feel compelled to write. And had you not written that blog, it's
yeah.
unclear whether you'd have this job now that involves doing the things that you love doing, writing, right? Had
Right.
you,
Yeah.
it probably was inconvenient, right, for your life at
Oh
that
yeah.
point to do the thing that
Yeah,
you
and I mean
did.
that's the thing too. Like, yeah, I had another job, but I would write at 5 and 6 a.m. or 10 o'clock at night, and those things that we're passionate about, we'll make them work if we're
Yeah.
truly passionate about it. And that's where there's a question that I raised at the beginning of the book: how much is living a great life worth to me? And if it's a huge worth to me, then what am I willing to put in? And I think
Yeah.
it really comes down to that. And talking about self-awareness that you brought up earlier, it's knowing yourself and knowing what you're truly passionate about and willing to put in.
So that we got a question on how did you make it work? So I'm hearing from what you did is how you made it work is you just slept yet less, right? Or stayed up. You just
Yeah.
basically what got cut was sleep.
Yeah, I mean, you learn to live with it, and knowing, you might put a deadline to it, because living that way forever is not stable. We do want to get back to a stable life. A life, I don't believe life can be completely balanced. I view life more as comes in seasons. There's seasons that are busier. There's seasons that are not as busy, and it's knowing what season you're in and learning how to handle those things. But viewing life and seeing a light at the end of the tunnel is important. That there's an end to the monotony or the stressful part or whatever stage you're in. And so if you give yourself, if my blog hasn't reached this in 2 years, then I'm going to quit. And I've heard people give themselves an ultimatum in that way, give themselves a deadline, a timeline, and if they don't reach it, then they're done. And
Yeah.
so that if that's the way you want to handle it, then great. And that's a way too to communicate to your spouse, because if you're putting all
Absolutely.
this time into something. There was a time where my wife was like, when are you going to start
Adam.
bringing
Yeah.
income? But, you're spending 20, 30, 40 hours a week doing this thing, not bringing in much income at all. The only revenue at that point was ad revenue from my blog, and it wasn't substantial by any means. So, communicating to your spouse and your family and getting them on board and rallying around your dreams is important too, because if you don't have your spouse on your side, it's going to be very difficult to accomplish those things you want to
Yeah.
accomplish.
So the answer of
So,
what do you need to do? I heard put together one, pace it out. You talk about seasons, so like you need to create a
yeah,
pace that's sustainable. If you were getting 4 hours of sleep every night for like a year, you probably that would not be sustainable. So coming up with a plan that had a pace and kind of a season aspect to it. I heard you say another thing, which is like come up with metrics and say, I have to hit this metric. And if I don't hit this metric, then I'm, abandoning or moving on. And then I heard have a plan that incorporates your spouse, because you running off and doing like, I know, honey, but I'm still going to spend 20 hours. Hope you're happy changing the diapers all the time. Like, probably would
Right.
not work.
Not going to work for
Right.
too long.
Yeah,
If
exactly. Or
not
especially,
always.
especially in cases where there have been cases where your spouse is actually either taking on the lion's share of household responsibilities, or actually pulling in tons of hours so that they can make ends meet while you are doing your passion project. Those kinds of things cause a lot of tension, I think. How did you work those things out with your wife? One sounds like you did a plan, but how else did you kind of overcome that situation?
I mean, yeah, in the pre-interview, I was kind of telling you that that at the time of, so I'd started this blog. We had our first child. My wife became a stay-at-home mom, and so from going to career to stay-at-home mom, she was a stay-at-home mom for 7 years. She just now went back to work for the first time in January and it was so cool because I saw her face light up again. She was, to be around adults all day is different
Right.
than kids all day, and so that made me so happy for her to be able to do that. That's a whole other conversation with daycare and all that stuff. But going towards the business side, it was at that point saying, how can I bring in more income? Looking at my talents, what I had in my possession, which not really a possession, but what did I have at my, in
Strengths,
my
yeah.
arsenal? And
Yeah.
it was blogging, but it was also this huge audience of people asking me questions already. It was like my audience was telling me what business to start. And if you're that fortunate, you better do it,
Right.
And so, I won't negate the fact that timing, starting 10 years ago, before all this blogging and social media was popular, didn't help with my success. But, you're saying, Adam, you started 10 years ago, your success is based on that. I would tell you that, 10 years ago was better to start than today, but today's the best day to start. It's better to start today than tomorrow
Right.
or someday. And so if somebody's watching this or listening to this and thinking that they couldn't have success in it, well, I would just challenge you to start with whatever that passion is, and give yourself a timeline. If it doesn't work, I wouldn't say a month is long enough to see if it's going to work. Some people are saying, why isn't this working for me? And you might have only been doing it for a week or a month or 6 months or a year. And a lot of times that's not long enough. I didn't see success with my business until year 6. And I think a lot of the problem that people run into is they'll quit at year 3. And, if they would just press on to year 4 or year 5, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but the first 5 years of small business, I forget which percentage it is. It's big, of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. But if you can make it to year 6, you start seeing that profit come in.
Right.
And I think that mentality is adaptable to a lot of different businesses here or passion projects or whatever people are working right now.
Yeah, so it's a perfect segue into the fear of inadequacy, because what I heard you say at that is like, well, because there are people who want to be the next Adam Smith, right? And they're like, well, Adam, why should I do that? Because you've got 10 years ahead of me. Why should I write the book? Because you've already written the book. Why should I do a blog post? Because you've already done that. There's this kind of fear of inadequacy. Like, I can't possibly do it. It's already been done. You said it a perfectly sufficient way in this book. Why do I have to say it a new way? So there's always this kind of fear of inadequacy. It's where it's like, I don't have the skills exactly. Plus, you have like 10 years of advanced, skills that I haven't, because you've been doing this for 10 years. I won't make enough money. You're telling me I have to wait for 6 years. My wife is not going to be able to tolerate that. And I don't really I've never done a blog. Why should I feel like I should do a blog? Like, what makes me think I can do a blog? So there's this imposter syndrome. So there's a whole bunch of things in that example. If, let's say, I'm trying to become the next Adam Smith, what would you tell people who are having those fears of inadequacy?
Yeah, we talked about practice. It's going to take practice and work to make yourself. I think a lot of it is rooted in comparison. You talking about becoming the next Adam Smith, or whoever it is. And, in the grand scheme of things, I'm a blogger who wrote a book. I'm not this ultra successful person, but that ultra successful person that listeners are comparing themselves to.
Right.
And, as Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. We have to stop comparing ourselves to other people, one, but then comparing ourselves to the wrong people who have been in it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. In the leadership business space, if I'm going to compare myself to John Maxwell, or I'm trying to or Zig Ziglar, or these huge business leadership authors that, did it for years, 40, 50 years, have been writing books, I'm going to have a very negative outcome after looking at the success that they have had. They've had more time, they've had more practice, they've had more experience. Our stories are what change our perspective. There's a lot of things there that comparison will bring us that is the negative side of inadequacy. And I would just say that really look at and see who you're comparing yourself to. And this goes back to self-awareness and being comfortable in our own skin and knowing who we are as people, as individuals, our value, our self-worth. A lot of these things are rooted there. And again, my journey is not the same as yours. It's not the same as listeners. People had bad childhoods. People have had bad bosses. People have had bullies. People have had online bullies in the age that we're in. And so it's very hard to say without knowing the individual. That's why your work and my work is important, because we get to sit down with individuals one-on-one and get to hear their story and their background and can give them an individualized plan. That's why it works. Right. With saying this one size fits all advice hardly ever works. It really does pay to sit down with people. Yeah. That's why these exercises in the book are important. Right. I give people the exercises to identify their passions, to identify their goals, and most importantly, their fears, which the fears part is the thing that nobody identifies because they're too scared to look at them, because it's uncomfortable. We don't want to look at our fears. Right. We'll just keep going without looking at them. Right. And
let's just fast forward past that step, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And hopefully we end up where we want to.
Exactly.
But it's when we identify those fears and actually do something about those fears that we can begin living better lives. And
yes, and this is actually, I was trying to flip to the page in your book. So you actually, it's page 94 of your book, where you actually have the ideas that you have, the fears that you have around that, and what you did, which I think is really nice. So this is a 3 for folks that are on the radio. There are 3 columns, which is your ideas in one column, your fears in the second column, and your passions in the third. Because I think that, like you said, we have an idea, but we probably know what some of the passions are with it, but we haven't necessarily dealt with the fears associated with this. So this, to me, is really nice because it gives a very balanced look at things. And if you look at this table, what stops you from moving forward is the fears. So if you don't include this column, it's kind of an unbalanced perspective in looking at things. And I think some of the things that I'm just going to reiterate some of the things that you said, because I really appreciate and agree with them, is that, starting from the beginning, one is I love the idea of putting down your strengths and figuring out what you're good at. And you'll be surprised, like you found and that I found, which was that the thing that I was doing already for free, giving advice to people would ask me about, like, I've been the kind of person that people have asked questions from, and I'm totally inept in some of them. Someone asked me a stock advice question, and I said, yeah, don't sell Microsoft stock. It's not the right time. I'm like, and the person came to me later saying, I'm so grateful for the stock advice. I'm like, I gave you stock advice? Oh my God, that's terrifying, right? Some people ask me about directions on what to cook. I mean, I'm like, I can't even believe the kind of questions people ask me, but like, well, what were people doing? They were coming for me for advice on what to do with their lives. Whether
And that's important too. I mean, like
why
coaches
I
even
don't
have
know
coaches. You know,
exactly.
like I have a financial and health coach too, and like we realize the importance of them. You
Yeah,
know, and
so like
I'll just leave it at that.
but you
Yeah,
have there's probably a strength and skill that you have that you haven't recognized that you can actually make a living from, and you don't even recognize it until you go, wait a second. I mean, I think the thing that you did, which is you said, wait a second, I have all these people that are, or I have a question. Should you ask others what you're good at? Yes, I think you should ask other people what you're good at. It's actually from people giving me feedback that I've been super clear about what I'm good at doing. But it's basically looking, taking an inventory. You had all these names. You got, sure, yeah, you got there at the right time at the right place. But there are a ton of other people who got there at the right time in the right place, but that did not do what you did, which is say, now what am I going to do? How can I capitalize on this and do something I love doing? How can my passions meet, the strengths that I'm bringing already? So I think that that's one thing in terms of fear of inadequacy that I heard you say. The other thing I heard you say is don't compare yourself to others. In an example that I gave, like okay, yes, you may not be Adam Smith year 10, but Adam Smith year 1 comparing to Adam Smith, person
yeah,
starting off year 1 comparing to Adam Smith year 1, probably that's a fair relative comparison.
yeah.
And
10 people reading
yeah,
my blog. You know, I think anybody could probably do that. But yeah, I mean, what you're reinstating here is what we're talking about are all these ideas, but it comes down to action at the end of the day. I mean,
right.
you have to take action for anything to be of any worth. I mean, we could talk about this all day, but unless we're putting action in, unless listeners are putting action in, it's all just discussion. And
Right.
so you have to put in action to reap the benefits, to reap the rewards. You have to
Yeah, you
put the
had to
work
try.
in.
You had to put a
Yeah,
blog together. You
yeah,
tried to like create a consulting practice. So, a dear friend of mine, I talked to him and I said, "It seems to me that your passion is getting your voice out there." And so he created a blog or iTunes channel, and he didn't know what to do, and he basically was smart enough to interview someone who had this incredibly popular blog and said, "What do I need to do?" And they said, "Michael, what you need to do is publish every single day. And if you are
mm,
religiously publishing every single day, you will get the numbers." And now his numbers are completely outpacing me because he publishes every single day, sometimes
wow,
twice a day, 3 times a day. And so he went from like 0 to 10,000 in subscribers in YouTube in a very, very short time. But that was because he was just
wow,
all in. And so, but I think the more important thing is he's willing to ask questions for, like,
mm,
so people could come to you and say, Adam, like, you've already learned all these things. Can you tell me what you've learned? And I think that that's a way that you can deal with the fear of inadequacy that you mentioned in your book. Like, find mentors and ask them to
yeah,
coach you about this stuff. Okay, so we talked about mentors and getting a list of your tangible skills. Fears of uncertainty. So there's always this fear of like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And I think that that's where your ideas, fears, and passions come in. But how do your strengths, like, tell us a little bit about how you came up with your list of strengths. So you had you had a long list you had 10,000 on your email list. You have people who are coming to you already. What else was part of your identifying of your strengths?
well, there's a lot of strengths finder tests out there. I
Hmm.
will say I took the strengths finder test. My number one strength from that is futuristic. I took disc model as well, but futuristic's my number one. So learning how to remain in the present, as we've talked about, is something that I have to be hugely intentional with. But being futuristic, I am a planner. I knew that about myself already, but this test said it's my number one strength out of everything.
Mm.
And so, okay, my number one strength is planning, or futuristic. I love to plan. Let's plan for the future. And so, starting my business, that was easier for me because I am always thinking I'm a growth mindset. You know, how can I grow? And so I hate staying stagnant. Now that brings up a whole other list of problems, such as being present, or I have to be very intentional of learning from the past, which Those are just things that I have to be very intentional with. But the thing about strengths, the importance of it is learning to look at our strengths, and finding those strengths are typically where we spend our time. And so knowing where we spend our time, that can relate to passion. And so a lot of times if you're having, Adam, I hear all these things, but I'm having trouble identifying my passion. Look at your strengths, look at the things you like to spend time doing. A lot of times that will give you an idea, a business idea. I like to write before I started a blog. But things were going electronic, online, internet, and so I thought I will do it. If you remember Zanga, I don't remember. Yeah. I don't know if that's where I started blogging. It was just a daily blog, and so that's where the idea of creating a blog. You will have to tinker with things. You will have to try things out. Things won't work, and that's just a part of it. And we learn from our mistakes. But if we begin viewing mistakes as stepping stones, as learning moments, rather than these things that just keep us stagnant or push us down, push us back. Right. A lot of times people will look at mistakes as, oh, I shouldn't keep trying, or failure, they might call it. I'm not a fan of the word failure because of this concept here. We're always learning, always even if we're operating in our strengths, mistakes will happen. But I think it's very important that people view mistakes as stepping stones, because it's only going to make them better. And then coming up with these ideas, maybe you have an idea that didn't work, an idea that sort of worked, and what if you combine the two and created a new idea? And I talk about the idea phase that I go through in the book a little bit. The way that, I look at the spectrum, take an idea from one end, take an idea from the other, try to combine them. If that doesn't work, play around with the idea and see what works. And that's actually how I came up with the bravery process. I viewed bravery as the top, complacency as the opposite, and then filled in the middle. And so if that gives people an idea of a business or whatever it might be, of a passion project that they want to work on, go for it, but mistakes will come, and just learn from them would be my advice there.
Yeah. So we were talking about the fear of uncertainty, and as part of that, you talked about the fear of failure, because oftentimes we don't know. And one of the exercises that I actually have, it's a kind of equivalent of your grid, is to look at what you know and it's simple, what you know and what you don't know. And the things that you don't know, put a list of what you're going to do to find out. And I think that's the equivalent of you talk about getting the facts. Because oftentimes our fear of uncertainty is because we just don't know the facts. So once you do the research, you'll know. So like one of the common things that I hear from clients is, I'm afraid I won't be able to make money that I need in order to survive. My family and I will survive. I'm like, well, what is that number that you need to survive? What is your X? What is that X, which is the bare minimum that you need to make in order to make mortgage payments? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, so you're fearful of something, and you don't even know what that number is. Right. So go meet a financial planner and figure out what that number is, because otherwise this fear of this number that you don't even know and not meeting this number is the reason why you're not moving at all, because the fear of uncertainty and fear of failure. So I think that one of the things that you mentioned in here is to come up with the facts. And I think oftentimes people don't come up with the facts. They would just rather, it's not that they would rather, they just can't break it down. So that's why I think the joy in this bravery process is, it's like, okay, I have the fear of uncertainty. Okay, then what do I need to do? Well, then I need to then get the facts. Well, then where do I go for the facts? I can take classes. I can ask my friends and family. I can be, there's a whole set of things that you can do. But if you don't know what fear you're suffering from, because you haven't filled out the table that you have of passions, fears, and ideas, then you don't address the main reason why you're not moving, which is the fear of the unknown. Last thing I want to ask you about is fear of being judged, which is, I'm going to leave my current job. What will my staff think? Or I'm abandoning a sinking ship. How do you address those kinds of issues? Because people feel bad about leaving their current job, or it could be like, what's my wife going to think? I feel bad because she'll be the sole breadwinner. There are all sorts of different kinds of things that I think are really about a fear of being judged. Can you talk
Hmm.
about how what you would recommend for people who have those fears?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it is self-awareness, which we've already talked about, but talking specifically about a company and a team. I had a leader that I worked for one time, and he told me a company's success when a leader is there isn't as apparent, but if a team is still successful after a leader leaves, that is the true mark of success. And so um, I think it's important that while you are where you are, this is going to be a segue. We'll go into that actual question, but um, for the time being, where you are, you need to put in as much as you can give. Not thinking about the fear of being judged, obviously, but after you leave is going to really tell you how good you did as a leader, as a manager, as an employee in a business. The systems that you set up in place while you're there, are they continuing to help the team grow? If you're a leader within your company, in your organization, the staff that you trained, the different things that you put in place, the different meetings, the different check-ins. If those things are still working after you're gone, and your team has ownership, and your team is still looking after the company and the organization and your business without you being there, then of course that frees you up. That signals buy-in. That signals that you've done your job as a leader, as a trainer, that you have created this buy-in, and that people truly want you and your business to succeed even after you leave. So that's the company standpoint. I was very grateful for that advice that leader gave me.
Yeah.
It really changed my perspective, because
Yeah.
it freed me up to view more big picture stuff instead of always being in the trenches. Because when we are always in the trenches, there's things that we miss
Right.
with clients and so forth. Um, but that leads me to the fear of failure, or I mean, sorry, the
Fear
fear
of
of
being
being
judged.
judged. Um, you know, when we're afraid of what other people think of us and allow people to dictate who we are and what we do, um, I think we are selling ourselves so short. And not only is it talking about, do we need to go back to self-awareness and understanding who we are as a person, but realizing just how short life is. If we view life as 80 years, and there's one thing that none of us can escape, is death. We're all going to get there,
Right.
and when you realize that and how short life is, it's too short to allow other people to dictate what you're going to do with your short time here on earth when it comes down to it. And so when you have that mentality of I have people to impact, life is short, I have a mission, I have things to do, I have fear to fight, I have bravery to find. When it comes down to it, we just don't have time. Like someone asked me the other day, "Do you fear anymore, Adam? You wrote a book on being brave." Of course I fear it. That's what I write about in the book. But I don't have as much time now to be afraid.
Right.
Is the way I put it. I've got to make a decision. I've got to go with it. And if it's good, great. If it's not, I'll learn from it. But the more successful you become, the more opportunities, the more things that come up, the more jammed your schedule does become. And it is a constant thing with my schedule and my phone that I'm visiting, looking at my calendar. Can this go? Can this go? But yeah, I mean, life is just too short to allow other people to dictate. And that might sound trite, and that might sound like something that people know, but it's really grasping that and understanding that yeah, the fear of being judged, just you can't allow people to dictate your life. You just have to go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the idea of you'll be able to, just to reiterate what you said, the idea of actually the true test of how great of a person you were was really how the aftermath that you lead. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing, this whole idea of abandoning ship, is that one time I was in in the court in Seattle, and we were picking jury members, and
Mm.
someone raised their hand. I was like, "I'm sorry, I can't leave Boeing. I'm like the head engineer, and we're shipping a product." And the judge said, "So there's no one else. You know, Boeing has like X thousands of employees, so there's no one else but you that can ship this product out. Is that right?"
Right.
And he's like, "Well,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
that's
I
a
guess
good.
there are some
Yeah.
other people. You know, there are other people." And so to me, this question revolves around self and other. Like, is another person's needs going to be more important than yours? And they're always like interdependency. So you may actually have workers. Yeah, it's going to be hard that your best friend who you worked with in a group is there and you've left. But then at the same time, if you're not going to be looking after your own needs, who is? Like, there's, unless that your best friend is looking after your needs, like, it's only you who is steering and
Yeah.
control. Like, and talk about what you have control of. You only have control of yourself. You can't control what your friend's going to think or if they're going to feel
Sure.
abandoned. And you can't really control what other people think. Like, there has to be, in my book, it's almost, it has to come down with faith. Like, you have to have enough
Mm.
faith in what you're
That's good.
doing and your vision and your mission and your passion to actually, that has to be greater than the fear of what other people say, um,
Mm.
in my
It's really
mind.
good.
But I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting because I think the hardest thing for me, because my path is just so abnormal. You know, if people were to ask me, what are you doing when you're at a cocktail party? Like, you have a really nice, you know, like I describe, there's a cover story, which is like, oh, I'm doing, you know, these interviews, blah, blah, blah. And I'm doing some workshops with clients, and I'm doing my career coaching and stuff like that. That's my cover story. So I sound normal, but really my real goal in life is to you know, follow my highest voice, or to awaken my heart, which, if I said
Yeah.
those kinds of things, they sound really off-putting to people, right? It sounds like, what? No, I
Mm.
mean, like, what is your life goal, as in, like, how you're making money, and, like, tell me about your life coaching. But if you talk about
Yeah.
your real goals,
Right.
it's often like, but if
Yep.
you're not holding that flame of passion, and you're not holding that torch, as you describe the passion, stronger than for yourself, then who else is going to hold it?
Right. And what you're talking about too is an idea that I visit in the book, which is isolation that can lead to isolation because we believe that the
Yes.
fears we're experiencing, the goals that we have are not any sort of goal that another person will have. And fear is a friend to isolation. And I found
Mm,
that, I mentioned that in my story. Once I started talking to people and telling people about my own fears, they would open up, and come to find out they would have very similar fears to mine, or I would find out that they would have different fears, but I would at least find out that other people were fearful just like me.
right.
And a lot of people remain in this isolation because it feels weird and uncomfortable, and they won't share. And I found that to be really valuable as well. That just reminded me of that. But
Yeah, to speak your truth,
yeah,
right? If when you speak your
yep,
truth,
that's
you
right.
enable others to speak their truth, and then the fear no longer dominates, right? We can actually have
That's
something
right.
else here in our life. So I love this book. I love the fact
Thank you.
that you are helping people become aware of all the different nuances of things that actually keep us from moving on to our next step. So we've been talking to Adam Kirk Smith, The Bravest You, and we've been talking about all the different ways that you can overcome fear so that you can move into things that you love and are passionate about. So thank you so much. You can find this interview on the Fired Up with CJ YouTube channel, and tell us about your website and where people can find your stuff, Adam.
Absolutely. So asmithblog.com is the website. And then you can find me all over social media, asmithblog. Again, the book's name is The Bravest You. And you can find that on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you like to buy your books.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here.
It was a pleasure.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.